Inaz and the Two Unmarriageable Lovers. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This story is narrated in 4 books. Book 1. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review to be printed in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the real love story of 2 unmarriageable lovers. Therefore, all names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 76. The bloody atrocities of the invasions of Islam. After exposing the misogynistic teachings of Islam and the hidden life of the Prophet Muhammad, the Sudanese Muslim apostate girl Inaz Ahmed Salah proved in her 3rd speech that Islam is not the religion of peace, but the religion of terror and terrorists. To prove her claim, she narrated in great detail the brutal history of Islam, which is called jihad in the way of Allah for spreading by the sword the bloody Arab religion all over the known world. She began by saying, according to the Egyptian Muslim historian Raghib al-Sarghani, all Muslim scholars believe and teach that Islam is the last message of God to mankind. Allah has ordered Muslims of all time to spread his religion by their swords and spears all over the world. Allah knows that everywhere non-Muslim people are going to resist and stand against Muslims by their swords and spears and try to prevent them from coming to their lands and spreading God's final message to mankind. Muslims have the right to fight them, kill the men, possess their properties, rape their women, enslave their children, and occupy their lands and spread the light of Islam. Based on this, Muslims believe that their God Allah orders them to invade other countries to take the peoples of those lands from the worship of human beings and idols to the worship of their Lord and Creator, from the injustice of other religions to the justice of Islam, and from their suffering in the world to the happiness of the world. According to the Quran, Muslims are the best community ever created by Allah, Surah Al-Imran 3, verse 110. The Prophet Muhammad explained why the Quran said the Muslim community is the best community in the world. Narrated Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, the verse, "You are the best of peoples ever raised up for mankind," means the best of peoples for the people. As you bring them with chains on their necks till they embrace Islam, mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari. Therefore, the Muslim community is the best community in the whole universe because they invade other countries, fight and kill men, and put some of them along with their women and children in chains until they embrace Islam and hence save them from spending their eternity in hellfire instead of going to hell. Muslims secure for them a place in paradise with the beautiful virgins and rivers of wine. No doubt, people will resist, and it is the duty of Muslims to force them to submit to Islam for their own good. Non-Muslims have no choice except to accept Islam or get killed by Muslim invaders. According to the Muslim historian Raghib al-Sarghani, most countries touched by Islam have encountered the sword. The entire Persian Empire, which today are Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan, were invaded and conquered by the sword. Through the great Muslim Ghazi or invader, Timur, who was also called Tamerlane, Muslim Mujahideen invaded the Asian regions of today Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and reached up to Moscow in Russia. Through the sword of Islam, they also opened, invaded, conquered, and captured the Levant, in the Arabic language called the Sham or the Fertile Crescent, today are Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel/Palestine, parts of southern Turkey, Anatolia, and Asia Minor. Through the holy war in the way of Allah, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, today Istanbul in Turkey, was opened, invaded, and captured. All of Eastern Europe was opened in jihad in the way of Allah and remained Islamic countries for centuries such as Greece, Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Cyprus, Malta, including Albania, Bosnia, and Herzegovina and Kosovo. All of North Africa was opened through jihad beginning in Egypt, then Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Sudan, Mauritania, Western Sahara, and Western and Central Africa. Through jihad in Allah's way, Muslims also invaded Andalusia, the Iberian Peninsula, today Spain and Portugal, and reached South France. They also invaded the subcontinent of India, today India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nagaland, Burma, also called Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. 80 million Hindus were slaughtered by the Muslim Arabs, Turks, and Mughals during their Islamic invasions of India. Therefore, the sword of Islam reached India in the east and Spain in the west. Dr. Raghib al-Sargani said, "Many Muslims today are ashamed to admit this fact of spreading Islam through the sword." According to him, only a few countries such as Malaysia and Indonesia, which Islam came to them through trade. The Prophet Muhammad fought 29 battles, most of them against the pagan Arabs who lived in the south, east, and central Arabia, which used to live outside the Byzantine Empire. He made 2 attempts to invade the border of the Byzantine Empire at Syria, but both attempts were frustrated by the Byzantine army and their Christian Arab allies. His first attempt was a small army of 3,000 fighters. The Prophet Muhammad informed his Mujahideen fighters that Allah had promised them possession of the treasures of the Byzantine Empire and the treasures of the Persian Empire. In order to fulfill this promise, the Prophet sent his military commander, Zayd ibn al-Harith, former known as Zayd ibn Muhammad, with 3,000 soldiers to Syria to invade the Roman Empire. And the Prophet knew exactly what they are going to face, and what would be the results, Al-Kimni, quoting Ibn Kathir page 241. Muslim historians and commentators refer to the Byzantines as Romans. When the Emperor Heraclius of the Romans heard about the approaching Muslim army, he came himself to meet those who dared to come near the boundary of his empire. With 100,000 Romans and 100,000 allied Arab tribes living near his border. The huge army of Heraclius killed the 3 leaders of the invading army and many Muslim soldiers. Zayd ibn Muhammad, whom the selfish prophet took his wife and raped her through halal Islamic marriage, was among those Muslim mujahideen who were cut into bits and pieces by the swords of the Romans. When Khalid ibn al-Walid saw the defeat of the army, he took the flag of Islam and withdrew with the remaining soldiers and fled to Medina. At the gate of the city, the people threw sand on the returning soldiers and rebuked them for fleeing from the battle. Al-Kimni page 470. Nevertheless, the Prophet corrected the people and told them, "They have not run away, but they withdrew for the time being." Al-Kimni page 470. The words of the Prophet revealed that he still insisted on the invasion of the Romans and their Emperor Caesar. After some time, the Prophet Muhammad himself went to invade Syria with 30,000 soldiers and 10,000 horses. Al-Kimni page 532. When the Muslim troops reached the border of the Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, in Syria, and that Heraclius, the great leader of the Romans, gathered a huge army at Homs, Emesa city, to meet them. The Prophet Muhammad changed his mind and returned to Yathrib, Medina. Ibn Kathir page 178 and Ibn Said al-Nas page 277. In order to find justification for the cowardly withdrawal of the Prophet without meeting the Romans, the narrators of the Sirah, biography of Muhammad, blamed the Jews for a conspiracy. According to al-Bihaqi, the reason which led the Prophet to go to the Romans was a Jewish conspiracy, but Allah saved him from that conspiracy. The conspiracy was revealed to the Prophet through the angel Gabriel when he reached Tabuk, and hence he cancelled the invasion and returned to Medina. Al-Bihaqi page 533. The conspiracy said the enemies of Allah and his messenger, the Jews, told Muhammad no prophet of God would die before he visited Jerusalem city. They wanted him to go to the Levant and fall in the hands of the Romans and get killed. But Allah intervened at the right time and disclosed to Muhammad through his angel Gabriel the evil scheme of the Jews and saved his darling prophet from the Romans. See Surah Al-Isra 17, verses 76 to 77. Therefore, the promise to conquer the Romans and possess their lands, treasures, and women had not been fulfilled at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. The prophet said to his followers, "Invade Tabuk, you will possess the daughters of the people of the yellow color and the women of the Romans." He means the women and daughters of the white Europeans. One of his commanders, a man by the name of Al-Jad ibn Qais, said to Muhammad, "Give us your permission to invade, but do not tempt us with women." Al-Tabari explaining the verse of the Quran in Surah Al-Tawbah 9 and verse 49. The Prophet Muhammad knew that his men became Muslims either through the use of force or for the sake of the war booty, the women, children, wealth, and properties of the non-believers. As we shall see, all the Islamic conquests, invasions, have been always motivated by the war booty, especially the women of the infidels. This fact is stated by Dr. Sa'id al-Kimni in his book, The Wars of the Prophet State. Before the immigration from Mecca to Medina, the message of Islam was based on a peaceful approach with full freedom of faith. It also admonished the faithful to be patient and wait for their rewards in heaven, where there are virgins of paradise and rivers of wine, milk, and honey. After the immigration to Medina, all the followers of the Islamic community, Ansar and Muhajirin, were changed into fighters and attackers, a complete state of soldiers and invaders, exactly like the tribe, and with its logic. Ansar were the supporters of the Prophet who lived in Medina, and Muhajirin were those who fled with him from Mecca to Medina. This is after the allegiance has changed from the tribe and its worshipped ancestor to the state, which represents the men of war and blood. Al-Kimni 2001, page 164. As concerning the change, which brought a sudden increase in the number of the Prophet's followers and led to the victory of the Battle of Badr, Al-Kimni states that, and here is the most dangerous material change, which played a significant role in attracting the warriors from the weak tribes, after the Prophet's 13-year sojourn in Mecca, inviting people to his faith without much success. At that time, the invitation postponed the promise of enjoyment and abundance to the everlasting paradise. However, when it has been announced that Allah has given permission to the Prophet and the Muslims to possess the wealth of the unbelievers, then the solution became an earthly and material fact, with other tempting gains before the weak among the people. These earthly and material gains attracted many weak people to join the army of the new state. Al-Kimni, page 165. Sa'id Mahmud al-Kimni continues, the Islamic army attacked the tribes in the Arabian Peninsula and subjected them by force to its new state, after terrorizing them so that they have to join the Medinan alliance. Al-Kimni, 1996. Page 235. Al-Kimni gave many examples to show how Muhammad terrorized the Arabs and the Jewish tribes and subjected them by the sword to his new Islamic state. The Arabs of Bani Salim, that great tribe, fled from their dwelling places as soon as they heard about the approaching Islamic mujahideen. They left behind their houses and cattle. The Muslims stayed 3 days in their houses and returned to Yathrib, Medina, with great booty. Yathrib became known as Medina only after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. After his death, Muslims called it Medinat al-Rasul, which means the city of the Messenger of Allah. Before Muhammad fled from Mecca to Yathrib, the city of Yathrib was a Jewish city, just like Khaybar city. Sa'id al-Kimni states Islam divides the world into 2 parts, Dar al-Islam, land of Islam, which are the lands of peace and security that include the Muslim countries, and Dar al-Harb, lands of war, which include all the countries of the world that Muslim army can attack anytime whenever there is good chance to do so. Al-Kimni 2004, page 190. The obligation of jihad began after Muhammad and his followers fled from Mecca to Yathrib. Our history tells us, resumes Al-Kimni, after the immigration of Muslims from Mecca to Yathrib, were the alliances of the Prophet and Banu Hashim from the ablest warriors of the tribes of Awaz and Khazraj, were the Jewish factories of weapons, and where the good geographic location. The Muslims started attacking the Meccan pagans and the rest of the Arabs. This happened in the form of organized and continuous invasions and attacks. The first attacking group was led by Abdullah ibn Gohash, the father of Zainab, the future wife of the Prophet, who would be shared by Zayd and Muhammad. In that battle, Abdullah ibn Gohash and his fighters violated the conditions of the holy months. All Arab pagans do not fight or wage war during those holy months. Muslims violated that sacred war custom that followed by every tribe all over Arabia. The Muslim group killed, robbed, and took captives from that Meccan caravan during the holy months. Those attacks and robberies continued in the Arabian Peninsula until turned to Islamic invasions to other countries of the world. In all their offensive battles, the Muslims were always the attackers except in two battles, the Battle of Uhud and the Battle of the Ditch, Al-Qimni, pages 190 to 191. The Prophet Muhammad always gets 1/5 of the booty. See Quran in Surah Al-Anfal 8, verse 41. The share of the Prophet was decided for the first time by Abdullah ibn Gohash in his attack on the Battle of Al-Nakala. That battle in which he violated the forbidden months and captured the booty of the caravan. It was an accepted war custom in Mecca and Yathrib and the rest of Arabia that in the holy months the pagans did neither invade each other nor fight. Those were the months of their pilgrimage rituals to their sacred Kaaba in Mecca, which Muslims are practicing until today. That battle was the first invasion and plunder for the Muslims. Abdullah said, "The 1/5 in everything we loot is for the Messenger of Allah, and the rest should be divided between us." A Quranic revelation came after that confirming what Abdullah ibn Gohash has decided. Al-Qimni, page 236, Surah Al-Anfal 8, verse 41. After the Battle of Badr, it became clear to the Arabs that the attitudes of the Muslims have changed. The Muslims began to go out in ceaseless military campaigns to cut the alliances to Mecca and the inside trade roads, and attacking the tribes in their dwelling places to terrorize them so that they should cut their alliances with Mecca and subject them by force to the new Islamic State. Al-Qimni, page 238. Al-Qimni says Osama ibn Zayd led another campaign in order to terrorize the Romans, for terrorism is one of the important pillars of Islam and its means to victory. Al-Qimni, page 192. Through this assertion, the Egyptian scholar Sayyid Mahmud al-Qimni admitted that Islam is not only spread by the sword, but it is the religion of terrorism and terrorists. While Osama bin Zayd was preparing his troops to invade the Roman lands, the Christian lands, the Prophet Muhammad commanded him, saying, "Attack them in the darkness of the dawn and fall on them by killing and burning them with fire, and invade them and return with the booty." Al-Qimni, 2004, pages 191 to 192. Quoting Ibn Kathir in Al-Bidayah and Al-Nihaya, pages 139, 143, and Al-Tabari in Tariq al-Ruzul and al-Maluk, page 156. Are these the words of the Prophet of God who supposedly came as a mercy to mankind, or the words of Satan the devil? Jesus says the thief cometh not, but for to steal, and to kill, and to destroy. But I have come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. The Gospel of John 10, verse 10. This shows us the religion of Muhammad is from Satan, and it brings with it stealing, killing, and destruction, whereas the message of Jesus is from God, and with it brings love, peace, and life. In order to support his point that Islam is the religion of terror, Al-Qimni refers to the Prophet's hadiths in which he said, "I have been granted victory through terrorism. I have been sent with the sword between my hands so that no one should be worshipped by anyone except Allah alone. Allah makes my living under the tip of my spear. I have been commanded by Allah to fight and kill people until they bear witness that there is no God, but Allah and Muhammad are the messenger of Allah." The Quran also supported the sayings of the Prophet in the following verse, "O you who believe, fight those who are close to you or unbelievers, and let them find in your hardness. And know that Allah is with those who believe in Him." Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 123. After the death of Muhammad, the majority or almost the entire Arabian Peninsula apostatized except for two cities, Mecca and Medina, and one small town called Al-Taif, and a small village known as Hagar. The general apostasy followed immediately upon the death of the alleged prophet of God Muhammad. The widely spread apostasy was a natural consequence for the forcible way that the pagan Arabs were compelled to accept Islam on the pain of death. For prominent Arab leaders and one powerful woman declared themselves to be also prophets of Allah. 1. Musaylima ibn Habib, he had 100,000 followers. 2. Al-Asdi had the largest tribe of Banu Asad as his followers. 3. Al-Aswad al-Anisi had 10,000 followers. 4. Talayha ibn Khuwaylid. 5. Sajah bint al-Harith, a female prophetess who had also 100,000 followers. Sajah bint al-Harith was from a Christian Iraqi tribe named Taglib. She was beautiful, a master of oratory, poetry, ability to compose verses of prophecies. The huge numbers of the followers of those leaders who became self-appointed false prophets led many prominent companions of the Prophet Muhammad to conclude that Islam died with its founder. Most of the companions of Muhammad told the first caliph, the first successor of the Prophet Muhammad, Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, to forget about Islam and consider it a story that came to an end with the death of the Prophet. Nevertheless, Abu Bakr insisted to keep Islam going on and vowed to fight everyone who forsook Islam, including those who refused to pay the zakat to him, compulsory Islamic tithes. There were two kinds of apostasy. One group flatly rejected Islam because they were forced by the sword to embrace it, and the second group continued to be Muslims but refused to pay the zakat to the new caliph Abu Bakr. The first group was the majority, and most of them were now following newly self-proclaimed prophets. Abu Bakr al-Siddiq made an oath to fight them and quoted one of the most important and famous hadith of the Prophet to justify his decision to kill those who rejected Islam after the death of Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad says, "Whoever changes his religion, kill him." Sahih al-Bukhari, hadith number 3017. The main reason behind such general apostasy is that 90% of the Arabs were forced by the sword to accept Islam against their wishes. Omar ibn al-Khattab, who would become the second caliph, stood against the decision of Abu Bakr al-Siddiq. He argued that some of those apostates were not truly apostates, but Muslims who refused to pay the zakat to the new caliph because they were not consulted when he was chosen to succeed the Prophet. Nevertheless, the new caliph firmly decided to go into major battles with those apostates, and his decision began the bloody atrocities committed under the first Islamic wars of apostasy. The first caliph Abu Bakr prepared 11 warring groups for fighting the apostates. He decided to send each group to one apostatized tribe and fight its followers. He knew full well that the Arab apostates were not united under one leadership, and hence fighting them would not be difficult as long as they were fragmented. He first sent one group to fight one of the self-proclaimed prophets. The first group was defeated by the troops of the Prophet Musaylima, and the few survivors fled back to Medina. After that, a second group was sent to fight Musaylima and was defeated too. After his 2 consecutive victories, the Prophet Musaylima decided to marry the prophetess Sajah and merge her troops with his troops, giving him a fighting force of 200,000. The prophetess Sajah accepted the betrothal, but before their marriage and alliance took place, the Caliph Abu Bakr joined all his remaining 9 groups into one single big army and sent them to fight against Musaylima at the famous Battle of the Yamama, which took place in December 632. The United Caliph's army was led by the military genius Khalid ibn al-Walid, known as the only sword of Islam. This Khalid would turn out to be the main cause of the defeat not only of the Arab apostates, but he would destroy the Persian army and turn the entire Persian Empire into a Muslim land. He also would defeat and expel the Byzantine army out of the Levant. Khalid's combined troops were defeated twice by Musaylima's fighters before they won the Battle of Yamama. The victory of Yamama gave the Muslims the upper hand over the other apostatized tribes. After that, Khalid fought 11 battles against the Arab apostates in Yemen, Bahrain, Oman, south of Arabia, south of Mecca, north of Medina, north of Arabian Peninsula, among others. Many of the apostates were forced back to Islam while thousands were killed. Those surrendered fighters who refused to renounce their apostasy and re-embrace Islam were killed through beheading, drowning in wells, throwing from high mountain cliffs, while many were burned alive. The Islamic Caliphate of ISIS today is doing the same thing to those who have been counted apostates among the Muslim Syrian and Iraqi soldiers. All the self-proclaimed prophets were slain except the prophetess Sajah. When her fighters were defeated, she repented and returned to Islam along with her remaining followers. According to al-Kimni, the wars of the Caliph Abu Bakr were meant to subdue the Arab tribes who refused to accept his caliphate after the death of the Prophet because they had not been consulted and hence, they stopped paying the zakat to him. Omar ibn al-Khattab and some of the companions protested against those wars because the tribes were still Muslims and killing them would contradict the hadith of the Prophet in which he said, "I have been commanded to fight all people until they bear witness there is no God except Allah and Muhammad the Messenger of Allah." Al-Kimni, page 214. Sa'id al-Kimni resumes, during those wars of apostasy the caliph's fighters had committed hideous crimes in which some Muslims were drowned in wells, others were thrown from high mountains, and yet others were burned with fire. Al-Kimni narrated a story in which the leader of the Muslim troops, Khalid ibn al-Walid, one of the 10 Muslims who had been promised to enter paradise by the Prophet Muhammad, had killed Malik bin Nuwaira, the leader of the tribe of Bani Yarbu, which a large section of the tribe of Bani Tamim. Khalid killed him because he had a beautiful wife, called Layla bint al-Minhal. According to the story, Malik bin Nuwaira and his men informed Khalid that they were still Muslims. In order to prove their adherence to Islam, they told Khalid that they had just finished their evening prayer. Khalid ordered them to surrender themselves and lay down their weapons and promised to negotiate the matter with them. When the members of the Bani Yarbu tribe surrendered themselves, Khalid ordered his men to kill them all. According to al-Kimni, Khalid's motive was to kill the leader of Bani Yarbu's tribe, Malik ibn Nuwaira, and take his wife, Layla bint al-Minhal, because she was an exceptionally beautiful woman. Khalid raped the beautiful wife on the same night he killed her husband, and in that he disobeyed the Quran because he did not wait for the Ida time, 3 months and 10 days. When Khalid returned to Medina, Omar met him and said to him, "You have killed a Muslim man and taken his wife and committed adultery with her. I swear by Allah I will stone you to death." Al-Kimni, page 217. Nonetheless, the Caliph Abu Bakr did not consider Khalid to have committed murder and adultery and hence did not punish him. Omar did not accept the decision of Abu Bakr and said to Khalid, "You are the enemy of Allah because you have killed a Muslim man and raped his wife." As we shall see, when Omar would become a caliph after the death of Abu Bakr, he takes revenge on Khalid by removing him from the leadership of the Muslim army at the Levant. For al-Kimni, people like Khalid and Abu Bakr should not be given respect because they were not worthy of respect due to their abuses. He further argued that those early wars were falsely forged and are taught to Muslim children in schools to this day as just wars. Al-Kimni, page 219. Those wars were political wars and meant to force the tribes to accept the caliphate of Abu Bakr, which was in fact forced on them. In this regard, al-Kimni's conclusion is a half-truth because the majority of the apostates forsook Islam after the death of Muhammad because they were forced by the sword to become Muslims. Al-Kimni continues to say, any Muslim who protested against Abu Bakr's leadership was condemned as an apostate and deserved to be killed, his wife taken, his money stolen, and his children sold as slaves in the slaves' market. Al-Kimni, page 248. The decision of Abu Bakr became a horrifying and terrorist law even today in the Sharia, which takes away the faith of people, condemns them as apostates, reaches their necks, kills them as infidels, exposes their women to rape, destroys their honor, enslaves their children, and robs them of their money and property. Al-Kimni, page 250. No Muslim scholar is prepared to tell the common Muslims that the great companions of the Prophet protested against the caliph's decision, among whom was Omar ibn al-Khattab, although Omar retreated from his protest when he declared that I saw Allah has put the decision in the heart of Abu Bakr and hence I knew it was the truth. Al-Kimni, page 251. Al-Kimni concluded that most of the decisions which had been clothed with divinity and become swords on the necks of the Muslims came as a result of those personal decisions. For example, Al-Bukhari included in his Sahih some hadiths and rejected some hadiths because his heart told him which were right and which were wrong. Accordingly, Al-Bukhari became divine and the author of a divine book which all the scholars agreed is the most authentic book on earth after the Book of Allah, the Quran. The Caliph Abu Bakr sent another army under the leadership of Ammar ibn al-As to the apostatized tribes of Khuzā and Wadiya and defeated them in the areas of Tabuk and Damatul Jandal. After all the apostates were defeated and subdued, Abu Bakr understood that the Arabs might rebel against him again. To mitigate this, he decided to send them out of Arabia on a mission to invade the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire. He, more than most, knew and understood that most of them became Muslims singularly for the prospect of war booty, wealth, and women of the infidels. Before Islam was invented by Muhammad, the Arabs were warring tribes that lived in attacking and invading each other. They lived in an arid desert that had scarcely any means of survival. Therefore, they lived through invading and looting one another. They were following a war maxim, which said, Min galba salba, which means the winners of any fight have the right to possess the wealth, property, slaves, women, and children of the losers. Muhammad understood the mentality of his people and hence legalized through a false divine claim to prophethood the maxim of the Arab tribes, invade and win. In a short time, he used military force and united all the tribes into one single state of Yathrib. As we have seen, after his death many tribes rebelled but were defeated and brought back by the sword of Islam to the newly founded state of Islam. As we have seen also, the main cause of their defeat was the lack of central authority and unity. After this introduction, the apostate Sudanese girl traces the wars of the Islamic invasions outside of Arabia until Islam reaches Spain in the west and India in the east, and the dire consequences to those defeated peoples who were known as the unclean infidels and enemies of Allah, who should be either converted to Islam or killed. The invasions and battles waged by the many Islamic caliphs, kings, and sultans are numerous and uncountable. The authentic mothers of the Islamic books give detailed descriptions of every battle that waged in the name of jihad on the way of Allah. The Prophet Muhammad said, I have been ordered to fight against people until they say that there is no God but Allah, that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, pronounce the Shahada or the Islamic creed, they pray, regularly perform the compulsory prayer 5 times in the day and pay zakat. If they do that, then their lives and property are safe. Sahih Muslim, Hadith number 33, and Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 1, Hadith number 387. Below is a copy of the message that the Prophet Muhammad sent to the Jolanda brothers, kings of Oman, through the intermediary of his messengers, Ammar ibn al-As al-Sami and Abu Zayd al-Ansari. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. From Muhammad, the Messenger of Allah, to Jaifar and Abdo, sons of al-Jolanda. Peace is upon him who follows the guidance. Peace be upon the one who follows the right path. I call you to Islam. Accept my invitation, and you shall be unharmed. I am God's messenger to mankind, and the word shall be carried out upon the miscreants. If you recognize Islam, I shall bestow power upon you. But if you refuse to accept Islam, your power shall vanish. My horses shall camp on the expanse of your territory, and my prophecy shall prevail in your kingdom. The historian al-Baladuri, writing barely 2.5 centuries after the coming of the messengers to Sohar, a city in Oman, described the event in these terms. When the people of Oman shall have responded to the evidence of truth and shall have promised obedience to Allah and His Prophet, then Ammar ibn al-As will be their emir, and Abu Zayd al-Ansari will be made responsible for conducting the prayers as their imam and for conveying Islam to the people and for teaching them the Quran and the precepts of the religion. Muslims in the West often claim that Islam stands for no compulsion in religion, and it is the religion of peace. Are not the life and message of their own prophet and his mujahideen fighters contradicting them? As Anaz shall prove through her third speech in the subsequent words, such a claim is false and flatly contradicts the violent message of Islam, and how that dreadful Arab religion in a short time had spread all over the known world by the sword and through jihad. Narrated Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle said, I have been made victorious through terror, and while I am sleeping, the keys of the treasures of the world were brought to me and put in my hand. Abu Huraira added, Allah's apostle has left the world and now you, Muslim mujahideen, are bringing out those treasures. Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 4, Book 52, Hadith number 220. Again, the Prophet Muhammad said, I have been sent with the sword between my hands to ensure that no one but Allah is worshipped. Allah who put my livelihood under the shadow of my spear, and who inflicts humiliation and scorn to those who disobey my invitation to Islam. Before his death, the alleged prophet of God had already made 2 attempts to invade and conquer the Romans of the Byzantine Empire. As we have seen, both attempts failed. The first military campaign was led by Zayd, which resulted in his death and the defeat of his small army by the superior army of the Byzantines, 3,000 mujahideen against 200,000 Romans. The second invasion attempt was led by the Prophet himself. When Muhammad reached the border of the Byzantine Empire, he was frightened to death when he learned about the superior and powerful army of the Byzantines. Instead of admitting that their coward prophet withdrew from the battle because he was scared for his life, Muslim historians invented a different reason. As we have mentioned earlier, they blamed the Jews for plotting a secret conspiracy to make the prophet fall into the hands of the Byzantines. They said the Jews told Muhammad there was no prophet of God that died before he visited their holy city Urshalim or Jerusalem. The Prophet Muhammad believed their promise and acted on it. He marched with 30,000 fighters and 10,000 horses and tried to reach the Jewish holy city. At the border, his way was blocked by 200,000 Byzantine and Arab soldiers. Fearing for his life, the coward chicken Muhammad fled back to Medina. Muhammad wanted to invade the Byzantine lands for one single purpose, to capture the women of the infidels and possess their lands and properties, and that he said it again and again in his hadiths. Muhammad inspired his men to war with the basest of motives, using captured loot, sex, and a gluttonous paradise as incentives. He beheaded captives, enslaved children, and raped women captured in battles. The alleged prophet of God said in many places that he has been ordered by Allah to fight men until they testify that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger. This is the most authentic hadith because it is mentioned in 113 reliable Islamic texts. Both Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim agreed upon it, and that is the highest form of authenticity. No Muslim scholar or ordinary Muslim can deny such an authentic hadith unless he wishes to be killed as a heretic or an apostate from Islam. The Prophet Muhammad used to tempt his mujahideen fighters with the capture of female infidels and raping them without the need to marry them. Commenting on Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 49, Al-Tabari stated, the Prophet Muhammad has said, invade Tabuk, the borderline of the Byzantine Empire. You will possess the girls of the yellow people, blonde girls, and the women of the Romans. White women, Al-Jad said to the Prophet, give us permission and do not tempt us with women. Commenting on the same surah and verse, Al-Qurtubi said, when the messenger of Allah, Allah bless him and give him peace, was preparing for the battle of Tabuk, he said to him, O Abu Wahab, would you not like to have scores of Roman women as concubines and female slaves? He said, O Messenger of Allah, my people know that I am very fond of women, and if I see the women of the Romans, the white girls, I fear I will not be able to hold back. So do not tempt me with them. One of his military leaders, a man by the name of Al-Jad ibn Qais, rebuked Muhammad and said to him, do not tempt us with women. Being confronted and exposed before his followers, the pimp Muhammad claimed that he has received the above verse from heaven, correcting Al-Jad bin Qais and calling him a hypocrite. See Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 49. While Osama ibn Zayd, commander of Muhammad's army, was preparing his troops to commence the invasion of the Roman Empire and capture the lands of the Jews and Roman Catholic and Orthodox Christians, the Prophet Muhammad commanded him, saying, attack them in the darkness of the dawn and fall on them by killing and burning them with fire and invading them and return with the booty.
Quoting Ibn Habib in Al-Mahabir, page 117, Ibn Kathir in Al-Bidayah and Al-Nihayah, page 139 and 143, Ibn Said Al-Nas in Awyon Al-Athari, page 145, Al-Suhili in Raut Al-Anif, page 24, Ibn Hisham, page 245, and Al-Tabari in Tarikh Al-Rusul and Al-Miluk, page 156.
I have quoted 6 authentic sources for such evil orders because Muslims in the West always claim that Islam is the religion of peace, and their prophet has been sent by Allah as mercy to mankind. Are these the words of a merciful prophet or from the devil? I believe even Satan might not give such evil commands to his devils. The first rightly guided Caliph Abu Bakr al-Siddiq repeated the same satanic instructions when he sent his Lucifer, Khalid ibn al-Walid, to fight the Arab apostates. Call them to re-embrace Islam. If they refuse, do not spare any one of them. Burn them with fire and kill them with force, and take the women and children as prisoners of war. Al-Tabari Part 2, pages 258 and 272. Following the orders of their caliph, Khalid and his fighters killed the surrendered apostates in very cruel ways, and that by beheading some of them, burning others, drowning some in deep wells, while throwing the majority of them from high mountains to end up into cruel murders. As soon as Khalid ibn al-Walid finished the wars of apostasy, the Caliph Abu Bakr sent him to begin invading the lands of the Persian Empire in Iraq and the Byzantine Empire in Great Syria, the Levant. At that time, the Persian Empire consisted of Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. Also, at that time, the Persian Empire was already depleted by its many wars against the Byzantine Empire. Neither empires were not prepared to enter into any major conflict. As we shall see, this factor will contribute to the rapid military successes of the Muslim army in its many battles with the Persian and Byzantine armies. In a short period of 25 years, the Muslim state occupied the entire Persian Empire, the Levant regions, and part of North Africa, today Egypt and Libya. Khalid ibn al-Walid proved to be a military genius in all his battles with the Persians and Byzantines. According to many historians, Khalid ibn al-Walid had never lost a battle. He was just like Alexander the Great, never defeated in any battle. In one of his early battles, Khalid said to the Persian leader in Iraq, "We have come to you with men who love death as your men love life, therefore submit to Islam and you will be spared." This statement is often repeated today by the fighters of ISIS and other Islamic terrorists in every battle they wage. They always claim to be fearless fighters who love death because of the promise of the 72 virgins in paradise. The Persian leader tried to convince Khalid not to fight with them. He proposed to pay money and help Muslims to fight against the Byzantines or Ethiopians, but Khalid refused his offers and insisted on the battle. The words of the Persian commander revealed 2 important facts. Firstly, at that time, Muslims were in high spirits of fighting. They loved to fight because they believed that if they won, they would get the 4/5 of the booties, women and wealth of the infidels, and if they died, they would go to paradise and get the 72 virgins and rivers of wine, milk, and honey. Secondly, the Persians were not willing to fight at all. They had to be forced to remain on the battlefields. In one battle, called the Zat as-Salasil, the Battle of Chains, the fighting Persians were literally chained to each other because their leaders knew that they would flee otherwise. Khalid ibn al-Walid fought 16 battles in Iraq against the Persians. Due to his military prowess, he won them all. Every Persian who refused to accept Islam was killed. Many Persians were converted to Islam out of fear of the sword of Khalid. Today their descendants are the Muslim Iranians and Iraqis. In a short time, all the inhabitants of Iraq became Muslims, and the country automatically became part of the newly founded Islamic State of Medina. Later on, the capital of the Islamic Caliphate became Baghdad city in Persia, today Iraq. Muslims gained so much weaponry and booties in those battles. Medina was flooded with the loots and women of the defeated Persians and Arabs. Muslim historians proudly mention that at the time of the 4th Caliph Osman ibn Affan, the people of Medina became filthy rich until the Jariya, female slave or female captive of war, was sold in pure gold that equals her weight. In one particular battle, Muslims defeated the Persians and captured many women, children, huge plunders, and one elephant. When the elephant was brought to Medina, the Arab women asked their men whether that huge thing was created by Allah or made by human beings. Living in the Sahara Desert of the Arabian Peninsula, those Arab women had never seen an elephant before. It is just like when the Native Americans saw the European settlers riding on their horses, They wondered how those white people made their dogs so big. When Abu Bakr saw that Khalid won all the battles against the Persians, he decided to send him to invade the Byzantine Empire. The Caliph believed in the promise of his prophet that Allah has given Muslims the treasures of the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire. Khalid ibn al-Walid left half of his Muslim mujahideen in Persia and took the other half and moved to Syria, with 9,000 mujahid fighters. Abu Bakr had already sent to the Levant an army under the leadership of Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah. Abu Ubaida's army had already fought 4 small battles with the Byzantines and won 2 and lost 2. When Khalid arrived in Syria, he took over the leadership of the Muslim army. The Caliph Abu Bakr was the one who ordered that Khalid be the main leader of the 2 joined Muslim armies at the Levant. Khalid then fought 5 small battles against the Byzantines and won all of them. According to the Muslim historian Raghib al-Sarghani, Khalid ibn al-Walid fought 11 battles in the Ridda Wars, Wars of Apostasy. He also fought 16 battles against the Persian armies and defeated them in all. In Elias's battle in Iraq, Muslims killed 70,000 Persians. Abu Bakr moved Khalid from Iraq to the Sham, Levant, to fight the Romans, the Byzantines. As we mentioned before, Muslim historians and commentators call the Byzantines Romans. This mistake arose because the Quran calls the inhabitants of the Byzantine Empire the Romans. There's a surah in the Quran called Al-Rum, which means the Surah of the Romans. See Surah 30. The first major battle between the Muslims and Byzantines was called the Battle of Ajnadin, in Jordan today. According to Dr. Raghib al-Sarghani, there were 100,000 Romans against 33,000 Muslims. Caution: Muslim historians always exaggerate the numbers of the enemy. This is because they want to prove that the angels of God always fight with the Muslim mujahideen in each battle, even until today. Before the battle, the Byzantine commander in charge of the battle asked the leader Khalid, "Why have you come to fight against us? Why don't you go and invade Ethiopia or Persia?" He even proposed to help the Muslims to invade the Persians. Then, he resorted to bribery to prevent the battle. He told Khalid that he was ready to pay each Muslim soldier 2 dinars, pair of clothes, pay 10,000 dinars to Khalid, and 20,000 dinars to the Caliph Abu Bakr. But Khalid rejected the offer and insisted on the fight. He gave the Byzantines 3 choices. 1. Convert to Islam. 2. Pay the jizya to Muslims. Or 3. The sword, fighting. The Byzantines rejected the first 2 choices and went to battle at Ajnadin. Of course, the Byzantines were not willing to fight, and hence Muslims got the upper hand and defeated them. They killed 3,000 Byzantines. Shortly after that battle, the first Caliph Abu Bakr died and Omar ibn al-Khattab took over. The second Caliph Omar immediately removed Khalid ibn al-Walid, the so-called Saifullah al-Maslul, or the only sword of Allah, and reappointed the former leader, Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah, instead. Omar justified his decision by saying that he was worried that Muslims began to put so much trust in Khalid rather than Allah. Truly, the majority of them thought that without Khalid they could not win any battle. Although Khalid was removed from the leadership of the army in reality, he continued to be the brains behind any military maneuvers. Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah took no action or made any decisions without consulting Khalid. In the main decisive battle of the Yarmouk, Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah disobeyed the decision of the second Caliph Omar and stepped aside to give Khalid autonomous control on the battlefield. According to another source, the Byzantine king asked Muaz ibn Jabal, another big Muslim commander, "Why did you come to our countries and want to fight against us? Why don't you go and invade Ethiopia? We can help you to invade and defeat the Persian Empire." Muaz ibn Jabal said to the Byzantine king, "God said we have to fight those who are close to us first, and then we will go to fight those who are far from us." In fact, Muaz ibn Jabal had based his reply on a verse of the Quran which commands Muslims to fight all unbelievers. "O you who believe, fight those who are close to you or unbelievers, and let them find in your hardness. And know that Allah is with those who believe in Him." See Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 123. The Byzantine king offered to give a lot of money and clothes to the Arab Muslims if they agreed to forsake their fight with them and return to their countries, but the Muslims refused and insisted on fighting. The Byzantine army was not ready to go into a major battle after the massive battle that it had fought against the Persian army, in which it lost half of its military power a mere 25 years ago. Also, the Byzantine Empire lost 1/3 of its population due to the plague, which was known as the Black Death. 30 million people died in that deadly plague. All those factors combined together discouraged the Byzantines from fighting the invading army of Muslims and eventually contributed to their defeat in 3 major battles against the Muslims. 1. The Battle of Ajnadin. 2. The Battle of Fal. And 3. The Battle of the Yarmouk. In the final Battle of the Yarmouk, according to Dr. Raghib El-Sargani, Muslims killed 140,000 Christians. All the army of the Byzantine consisted of Greek Christians and Arab Christians. In fact, Muslims killed only 50,000 Byzantine fighters, and 90,000 Christian soldiers jumped to their death off the cliff when they had no place to flee from the killing machine of the Muslim army. Once again, it was Khalid who chose the battlefield, and he knew that there was only one way out for the Byzantines if they were defeated. Khalid swore by his Allah that he would not take one single infidel man as a war prisoner, but he would kill them all, and that fear led the defeated Byzantines to jump to their death. The Muslim Mujahideen wanted the women, children, wealth, and lands of the defeated infidels. The defeat of the Battle of the Yarmouk ended the control of the Byzantine Empire of Syria. The Byzantine Emperor, Heraclius, accepted the fact that the defeat of his army at the Battle of the Yarmouk was God's decision and a result of the sins of the people of the land, including his. Heraclius took to the sea on a ship to Constantinople in the night. It is said that as his ship set sail, he bade a last farewell to Syria, saying, "Farewell, a long farewell to Syria, my beautiful province. Thou art an infidel's now. Peace be with you, O Syria. What a beautiful land you will be for the enemy." Battle of the Yarmouk. Emperor Heraclius had correctly interpreted the defeat of his army, the loss of his lands, and the rapid spread of Islam as the scourge of God. According to most historians, the Arab Christians did not show much resistance to the invading Muslim troops. Some historians went further than that and claimed the Arab Christians in fact gladly welcomed the Muslim Arabs and assisted them to occupy their lands because they were ill-treated by the Byzantines. There was a religious disagreement about the nature of Christ, one nature versus two natures, and that difference led to many persecutions of the Arab Christians by the Greek Christians. During the Muslim siege of the second largest city, Damascus, which was considered the second capital of the Byzantine Empire after Constantinople, the Arab bishop of Damascus helped Khalid ibn al-Walid to enter the city. He informed Khalid that the Byzantine soldiers were having the birthday party of a big military general and they were fully drunk and spent the entire night in an orgy. Ever helpful to Muslims, the Arab bishop had supplied ladders to Khalid and hence assisted him to take the city of Damascus. After the capture of Damascus, only Palestine and Lebanon still remained in the control of the Byzantines. Muslim Mujahideen fighters went on to lead a siege on Alia. Yerushalayim continued to be called by that name after it had been renamed 7 centuries ago by the Roman Emperor Hadrian. Alia was renamed again by the Muslims, and it became known by them as Al-Quds until today. When the city refused to surrender, Muslims used catapults and rained large stones on the hiding inhabitants. At that time, only Christians dwelt in the city. Jews were forbidden by the Byzantine Empire from dwelling in Yerushalayim. Most of them lived in small towns in other regions of Palestine. The inhabitants of Alia agreed to surrender, but they said they would surrender the city only to the Caliph Omar himself. Omar accepted their demand and came in person and received the keys of the city. When the Christians of Jerusalem or Yerushalayim surrendered to the Muslims and agreed to pay the jizya, one of their conditions to the Caliph Omar was not to allow any Jew to dwell with them. Jews were allowed to come to visit their holy city, but not to stay in their city Yerushalayim. Nonetheless, the city opened its doors to the Muslims and allowed them to dwell side by side with the Christians. The second Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab made an unfair pact with all the Arab Christians of Levant and made their religious leaders sign it in every city and town and abide by it. That infamous treaty is known as Omarian Pact and continued to be the guiding principles for centuries to come that govern the relationship between the Christians and Muslims to the present day. The first article in that treaty forbade Christians from building new churches or repair and renovate their existing places of worship. The renowned Muslim commentator of the Quran, Ibn Kathir, commenting on Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 29, states, "Paying the jizya by the Jews and Christians is a sign of kufr, unbelief, and disgrace. Allah said until they pay the jizya if they do not choose to embrace Islam in defeat and subservience. The Prophet Muhammad said, do not initiate the salam, the greeting, to the Jews and Christians, and if you meet any of them in a road, force them to its narrowest alley. This is why the leader of the faithful Omar ibn al-Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, demanded his well-known conditions in the Omarian Pact be met by the Christians, these conditions that ensured their continued humiliation, degradation, and disgrace. Despite those unfair rules and conditions of the Omarian Pact, still, the Christians of Levant preferred to be under Muslim rule rather than the Christian Byzantine rule. As we have mentioned above, according to the renowned Muslim commentator Imad al-Din ibn Kathir, the Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab made those unfair rules and conditions with the Nasara of the Sham, Christians of Levant, in order to humiliate, degrade, and disgrace them. The second Caliph Omar forced them to accept those conditions because they refused to accept the prophecy of their master and Prophet Muhammad. In fact, the Quran and Hadiths of Muhammad never call the followers of Christ Christians. Until today, Islam addresses them the Nasara. It means the followers of the sect of the Nazarenes, a derogatory name given by the Jews to the early followers of Jesus. They believed Jesus was born and came from the city of Nazareth, whereas the Christ they were waiting for his coming was supposed to be born in Bethlehem, the city of David. Therefore, the Jews who rejected Jesus refused to call him Christ and refused to call his followers Christians, but called them Nasara. Any Jew accepted Christ was kicked out of the Jewish synagogue, and he was socially boycotted and religiously persecuted by other Jews, including his family members. Accordingly, if the Quran is the word of God and Muhammad his prophet, then the verses of the Quran and the hadiths of the alleged prophet should call the followers of Jesus Christ, the Christians. After the defeat of the Byzantine army and capturing the main two cities in the Levant, Damascus and Urshalim, or Jerusalem, two important occurrences took place. Firstly, the Caliph Omar was killed by a Persian as revenge for his family and children. He faked his conversion to Islam in order to reach the Caliph Omar and kill him. Secondly, a deadly plague began in a small village in Palestine called Emmaus, which killed 75% of the Muslim soldiers who participated in the jihad at the Levant. The plague killed many Muslim soldiers and leaders, including the chief commander of the Muslim armies, Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah. The genius military leader Khalid ibn al-Walid had lost 18 of his sons in that deadly plague. He made many Arab, Christian, and Zoroastrian women, widows, and their children orphans. He murdered 2 leaders and raped their wives on the same day he killed their husbands. He died a broken heart man. He continued to lament the loss of his sons, and while he was dying in his bed he said, I am dying as an old she-camel dies. For the Arabs that is the worst type of end and the most shameful death. I personally believe the plague was the punishment of God for the atrocities that Muslim mujahideen had done in Persia and the Levant. It was not a coincidence that the plague started in the village Emmaus in which Jesus had supper with 2 of his disciples after his resurrection. See the Gospel of Luke 24, verses 13 to 32. According to the British female historian, that year, the invasions of Muslims to the Levant region resulted in the destruction of churches and monasteries, the sacked towns, the fields laid waste, the villages burned down. By the Arabs who were overrunning the country that year, the decline of Eastern Christianity and rising of Islam. From Jihad to Dimitude, London, 1996, page number 44. Thousands of Christians died of famine that resulted from those brutal attacks. Michael the Syrian mentioned that Omar sent Khalid with an army to the Aleppo, today Halab city in Syria, and Antioch region. There they murdered a large number of people. No one escaped them. Whatever may be said of the evils that Syria suffered, they cannot be recounted because of their great number. For the Arabs are God's wrath, Michael the Syrian, Volume 2, page number 421. Muslims interpreted their rapid victories over the armies of the two superpowers at that time, the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire, as divine favor. Nevertheless, historians pointed to many factors which contributed to the quick defeats of the Persians and Byzantines. The long-lasting wars between those two rival empires exhausted their military powers and financial resources. The Byzantine army was not ready to go into a major battle after the massive battle that fought against the Persian army, in which it lost half of its military power, decimated by a previous battle. Besides, the victory of the Arab Muslims over the Greek Byzantines was facilitated by the enemy within, the Arab Christians. Some of the Arab Christians smoothed the progress of the Arab Muslim mujahideen by their unwillingness to resist their advance, and by literally helping them through spying and supplying the needed assistance to enter the fortress cities such as Damascus and Yerushalayim or Jerusalem. The assassination of the Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab. Omar used to warn his leaders and governors not to send any slave or a newly convert Muslim to his capital city in Medina. He feared one of their number, deprived of their wives, children, and relatives, might seek revenge on him. He called non-Arab people al-alag, which means dirty and unclean people. So, in all his letters, he ordered his governors to keep those unclean al-alag out of his reach. Despite his fears and orders, one of the so-called al-alag managed to reach him and take revenge for his raped wife and daughters and his stolen and enslaved women and children. He was a Persian soldier who served under the commander Rostam Farrokhzad, but was captured in the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636, when the Persians were defeated by the Arab Muslim army of Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab on the western bank of the Euphrates River. After he was brought to Arabia as a slave, he managed to assassinate Umar in the Hijra year 23, the year 645. Abu Lu'lu'a the Persian was one of the men who were taken captives in the city of Nalawand, in today Iran. The Arab Muslims destroyed his house, family, children, and his country without them having done no evil to them. After he lost everything, he was taken captive to al-Mukaira ibn Shaba to work as his slave. For some reason, al-Mukaira sent him to Medina. When he reached Medina, he was grieved to see the captive children of his city and country and other countries filling the streets of the city. He searched with a heavy heart for his children among them, but could not find any one of them among those slave children. The crying of those wretched children increased his grief. According to the Muslim historian Ibn Sa'd, Abu Lu'lu'a used to meet the children of captivity, and whenever he saw them, he used to cry and feel their heads with his hands and say, "The Arabs ate my liver." Then he killed Omar as revenge for what he had done to the captives. Ibn Sa'd, Al-Tabaqat al-Kubara, Volume 3, page number 271. Abu Lu'lu'a murdered the Caliph Omar inside the mosque during the morning prayer. He pretended to be a Muslim and entered the mosque to pray behind the Caliph. While the Caliph and the rest of the Muslims were kneeling in their prayer, Abu Lu'lu'a stopped his prayer and moved forward and stabbed Omar to death. He stabbed him 6 times in his neck, chest, and stomach. He used a poisoned dagger to kill the devil incarnate who was the head of the Islamic Caliphate. Abu Lu'lu'a knew and understood there was nothing that could avenge the evils that the Muslim mujahideen had done to him, to his family, and to his Persian people than hitting the serpent on its head. It was the same method and for the same reason that the prophet of Satan, Muhammad, was poisoned by the brave Jewish captive girl, Zainab bint al-Harith, who sent him to hell before his time. Otherwise, that false prophet would have lived longer and taught more evil teachings against women and the so-called unclean infidels. During the caliphate of Omar ibn al-Khattab, Muslim mujahideen, the so-called fearless warriors of Allah, invaded many countries and reached from Isfahan in Persia, today Iran, to the city of Tripoli in Libya, North Africa. In those many bloody battles, thousands upon thousands of innocent people were murdered by the bloodthirsty Muslim mujahideen. Many women were raped, and many children enslaved and sold as slaves in the slave markets. Many houses were burnt and looted, and thousands of families were destroyed. The Mujahideen ransacked the countries and cities and looted the treasures of those defeated non-Muslim people and distributed the wealth, women, and children among themselves. It was not a religion that they wanted to preach, but to rob, enslave, and rape. This reminds us of the teaching of the Lord Jesus Christ about Satan, in which he said, "The thief, Satan, comes not but to steal, to kill, and destroy, but I have come to give them life, and life in its abundance." The Gospel of John 10, verse 10. If we compare the peaceful preaching and spreading of the gospel of Jesus by his apostles Peter, Paul, and the others among the pagans of the Roman Empire, and then see the spreading of the sword of Islam among the Christians of the Byzantine Empire and the Zoroastrians of the Persian Empire. For sure, the above verse of Jesus makes a clear distinction between the work of Satan, killing, stealing, raping, and destruction, and the work of God, giving life and life in its abundance. It is estimated that, during the 5 centuries of the spread of Islam, 272 million people were killed, of whom 80 million were Hindus and 60 million were Christians. In order to know how many murders, rapes, enslavement, and destruction those Muslim shayateen, devils, had done in those countries they had invaded, read Al-Tabari in his huge multi-volume, the Al-Tariq al-Ruzal and Maluk, and Al-Tabaqat al-Kubara by Ibn Sa'd. One of those Muslim mujahideen, an Arab man by the name of Mahafaz, narrated one of his experiences in the battles. In the year 16 Hijra, he participated in the Battle of Jala in Iran. He said, "We entered the city, and I saw a woman like a deer in her beauty, and her face shines like the sun. I took her and her clothes, and she became my Jariya, slave girl." Al-Tabari Volume 4, pages 26 to 27. The aims of those battles and invasions were not only to kill the men, enslave the children, and rape the women of those conquered countries, but also to loot their treasures and occupy their lands. In a few years, the companions of the Prophet Muhammad became filthy rich that their wealth was counted in millions of dinars, today millions of US dollars. Before the advent of Islam, the Arabs of the Arabian Peninsula were living in abject poverty and continuous starvation. They used to suck the stones in order to wet their thirsty throats and dry tongues. They also used to drink their camels' urines and sometimes their own urines to quench their thirst. The Byzantine commander understood the problem of those Muslims who came to fight him and hence offered money and clothes to them, but they refused to accept them because they wanted the fertile lands of Levant, the Fertile Crescent, and the women and children of the Christians. In a short period, their invasions made them extraordinarily rich and enabled them to possess the lands, women, and children of the so-called unclean infidels. The Islamic conquests or invasions continued after the assassination of the second Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab. Before the Caliph Omar was killed for his evils by Abu Lu'lu'a al-Farisi, Pyrrhus the Victorious, who rendered the vigilante justice, a Muslim leader led his mujahideen fighters without informing the second caliph and marched toward the invasion of Egypt. At first, Caliph Omar expressed his disapproval of such a step without his permission. Nevertheless, when the caliph learned that his leader, Amr ibn al-As, had succeeded in invading Alexandria, he gave his approval of the campaign. There are 2 important things to mention regarding this invasion. First of all, Amr ibn al-As informed the Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab that he found an exceptionally large library in Alexandria which had over 1 million books. The Caliph replied back and instructed him that every book that does not honor Islam and exalt Allah, burn it. At that time, the Alexandrian library was the greatest library in the Western world. It contained books on theology, philosophy, history, and various branches of science. Following the order of the Caliph of Medina, Amr ibn al-As set all the books aflame. Historians said that the fire and smoke continued for 6 months before every book was fully consumed and destroyed. The decision of the second Caliph of Islam became a guiding principle for Muslim troops wherever they went. Everywhere they went, they destroyed Christian churches and Hindu temples and burned to ashes the infidels' libraries and sacred books. Sometimes, beautiful churches' buildings were spared and converted into Muslim mosques. In this regard, the contemporary Indian philosopher and historian, Swami Vivekananda said, Their watchword is there is one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Everything beyond that not only is bad, but must be destroyed forthwith, at a moment's notice. Every man or woman who does not exactly believe in that must be killed. Everything that does not belong to this worship must be immediately broken. Every book that teaches anything else must be burnt. From the Pacific to the Atlantic, during 500 years the blood of the infidels spilled all over the world. That is Mohammedanism. He means Islam. This is a quotation from a speech he delivered at the Shakespeare Club of Pasadena, California, USA, on February 3, 1900. Secondly, the Coptic Christians of Egypt agreed to pay the jizya to the second caliph, and therefore he allowed them to continue following their Christian religion as dhimmis. The second caliph appointed Amr ibn al-As the wali of Egypt, or the ruler. Initially, the new ruler of Egypt did something which made all the Copts be happy. It happened to be their great spiritual leader, the Patriarch of Alexandria, the Pope of the Coptic Orthodox Church. Benjamin went into hiding for 11 years from the Byzantine authority. The Copts approached Amr ibn al-As and requested him to restore their fugitive Patrick Benjamin. Their new Muslim ruler accepted their request and restored their spiritual leader. But such a favor met with another huge demand of jizya by the Caliph Omar. Amr ibn al-As tried to convince his caliph that he was demanding too much from the Copts of Egypt. The caliph said, enriching of the Medina is more important than robbing and destroying entire Egypt. In other words, the so-called most just judge in the world said to the Muslim ruler, you must rob the Christians of Egypt and enrich the Muslims of Medina, the capital of the Islamic Caliphate. After the assassination of the second caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab, he was succeeded by Osman ibn Affan as the third rightly guided caliph. During the Caliphate of Osman, Muslims invaded Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and reached up to Morocco. The Christian Berber tribes of North Africa caused a serious problem to the Muslim invaders. Whenever they invaded a city and forcibly converted its inhabitants from Christianity to Islam and moved to the next city, the former city would apostatize and become Christian again. Then, they had to return and reinvade and reconvert the citizens of that city. Many Christian Berbers were killed during those processes. Nevertheless, the Christian Berbers managed to murder the main military commander of the Muslims, Uqba ibn Nafi. He was the nephew of Amr ibn al-As, the ruler of Egypt. He was ambushed and killed by Kausala, the leader of the Araba tribe of the Berber people and the Christian head of the Sanhaja Confederation. Meanwhile, the third rightly guided Caliph Osman ibn Affan was murdered inside his house by Muslims due to his corruption and bad leadership. One of his Muslim murderers was the son of the first Caliph Abu Bakr al-Siddiq. That murderer is known as Muhammad. Later on, Muslims captured him and killed him in a very horrific way. They opened the stomach of a donkey and inserted the body of Muhammad ibn Abu Bakr inside the belly of the donkey until he died of suffocation. So far, by God's grace, two of the so-called rightly guided caliphs and their false prophet were murdered for the evils they had done to innocent people. Some reliable Shiite sources mention that the first Caliph Abu Bakr also was poisoned by some Muslims, which caused his untimely death, just 2 years after his false prophet died of poison too. The same sources claimed that the daughter of Muhammad, Fatima al-Zahra, was poisoned by the Caliph Abu Bakr and died 6 months after the death of her father. Later, the rightly guided Caliph number 4, Ali ibn Abi Talib, will be dispatched to hellfire by a Muslim assassin in the same fashion. As a matter of fact, Islamic history revealed that Muslim mujahideen did not only kill the so-called unclean infidels, but they engaged in internal conflicts among themselves and massacred each other like wild beasts in the jungles. Islamic history books are full of many massacres that Muslim leaders fought against each other during the wars of apostasy between Abu Bakr's mujahideen warriors and the Arab apostates, Aisha's army against Ali's fighters, Ali's troops against Muawiyah's mujahideen fighters, and throughout the history of Islam until the Turks against the Arabs and Mongols against the Arabs and Turks, and today the terrorists against the moderate Muslims. At the time of the Caliph Yazid ibn Muawiyah, the Muslim troops invaded Mecca and destroyed the Black Kaaba, the house of their Allah, by the catapults, and raped thousands of young Muslim girls. The three Muslim historians, Ibn Sa'd, Al-Tabari, and Al-Waqidi narrated that the soldiers of Yazid ibn Muawiyah broke 1,000 Muslim girls' hymens in one single day. That means over 1,000 Muslim unmarried girls got raped in the most two holy cities of Muslims, Mecca and Medina, by Muslim men. After the last Umayyad caliph was removed out of power through a coup d'état, the Abbasid dynasty ruled and lasted for another 508 years, until the last Abbasid caliph was killed by Hulagu Khan, the general commander of Genghis Khan's army. The Abbasid caliphs took revenge on the Umayyad clan and wiped out of existence every creature belonging to that royal family. Reliable Islamic history books mention that even those dead and gone Umayyad caliphs' bones were exhumed out of their tombs and made to stand trials. Then, each caliph's bones, going back to the first caliph Muawiyah, were severely scourged by whips and then burned into ashes. The Abbasid caliphs' palaces were full of beautiful jari, female sex slaves, and female captives of war. In each palace, you could see teenage girls from all over the known world: Arab girls, Persian girls, European girls, Indian girls, African girls, and Jewish and Christian girls. Mostly, those foreign girls were female captives of those defeated and killed infidels. They would be ordered to walk bare naked inside the palace courtyards and gardens. The caliph, his male relatives, and his top officials could grab a girl at any time and anywhere and rape her. Islam did not require him to marry her or even apologize to her because she was the possession of his right hand, which means she was his property and female sex slave. He would not care if she died during the rape process. Just like a dog attacked his female bitch or a cock raped his hen. Some of those Abbasid caliphs would brag among their royals and officials that they had never had sex with the same girls they had broken the hymens of their pussies. Each one of them, any time, he wants to deflower the hymen of a pussy of a brand new virgin. Based on the wild nights of alcohol drinking, female singers, rapes, and orgies of those notorious adulteress and rapists, Abbasid caliphs, the famous classic book 1001 Nights was composed. Despite all the evil deeds done by those criminal Abbasid caliphs and their bloodthirsty mujahideen, still, the ruling period of the Abbasid dynasty is called the Golden Age of Islam. The worst of those Abbasid caliphs was a famous notorious womanizer called Harun al-Rashid. When Uqba ibn Nafi was murdered by the Berbers in North Africa, the Umayyad caliph in Damascus sent a new Muslim military commander, Musa ibn Nasir, Moses the son of a small Christian. From his name, it is clear that Musa was born as a Christian but converted to Islam. His story of conversion began when he was a small boy living in a monastery in Syria with some monks. He was under training to learn the Bible and theology and then to become a monk. Khalid ibn al-Walid invaded the monastery and took him captive after slaughtering all the monks. Then, Khalid converted him to Islam and made him a slave in his house. His being converted to Islam and brought up by such an outstanding military general of Islam turned out to be a great honor for Musa ibn Nasir. The Christian boy was brainwashed and turned into a bitter enemy of Jesus Christ and his followers. When he was grown up, he became an outstanding military general of the Islamic troops. He was assigned by the Umayyad caliphs the task of reclaiming North Africa to Islam. Musa ibn Nasir learned a good lesson from the mistake of the slain leader, Uqba ibn Nafi, and started to move slowly and reconvert forcefully the Berbers to Islam. The Berbers today are known as Amazigh. The slain leader Uqba converted the entire region of North Africa, today Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, in just a few months. Musa ibn Nasir took a few years to accomplish the same task. After subduing and converting the Berber tribes from Christianity to Islam, Musa ibn Nasir began to think of moving to the Iberian Peninsula, today Spain and Portugal. Musa knew that he was growing old and such a task needed a young and strong commander. Surprisingly, such a commander turned out to be one of the defeated and subdued Berbers, who was called Tariq ibn Ziyad. Those who fought for so long against the Muslim invaders and tried by all means to keep their Christian faith in a few years were turned into Muslim invaders themselves. Tariq ibn Ziyad was a fierce and successful Muslim commander too. He was nicknamed the Khalid ibn al-Walid of the Berbers. The newly resurrected militarily genius, Tariq ibn Ziyad made a solemn vow to convert Europe entirely until Rome and capture it for Islam. Muslims claimed that the Prophet Muhammad promised them that they would invade and open Constantinople and Rome, the two great capitals of Christendom, and turn the entire Christian world Muslim. History showed they tried for 7 centuries to invade and capture Constantinople, but they failed. Nonetheless, the so-called prophecy of their false prophet was partially fulfilled when the Ottoman Sultan, Muhammad II, also called Muhammad the Conqueror, captured and destroyed Constantinople in the year 1453, today Istanbul in Turkey. After they brought an end to the Byzantine Empire, the Muslim Ottomans destroyed half of Europe in order to fulfill that satanic prophecy, but it did not work. Muslims still hold to the false prophecy and believe one day they will invade and take Rome, the capital of Italy and the center of the Roman Catholic Church. Tariq ibn Ziyad succeeded in invading Spain and converting thousands of its population into Islam. According to Dr. Bill Warner, in Spain, Muslims made piles of Christian heads, slain in battle, that men on horsebacks could not see each other across. Tariq continued to take city after city, and in a short time, he converted the majority of the population into Islam. It seemed that Tariq was truly possessed by the spirit of the ruthless Muslim general Khalid ibn al-Walid, who defeated the Byzantine army and entirely destroyed the Persian Empire and converted its population to Islam. Tariq needed more troops because the Iberian Peninsula was too big for his small army of 12,000. He sent for his master and leader, Musa ibn Nasir, who was living in the city of Al-Karawan, in today Tunisia. Musa forwarded the demand of Tariq to the Caliph at Damascus. By this time, the capital of the Islamic State was changed twice. From Medina was moved by the 4th Caliph Ali to Kufa in Iraq. When Ali was murdered, it was moved by the Caliph Muawiyah to Damascus. Finally, the Abbasid caliphs would move it back to Baghdad, today the capital of Iraq. When the Muslims of Arabia and the Levant heard that a big door for jihad in the way of Allah was opened in Europe, hundreds of thousands of them gathered from Yemen, Iraq, Mecca, Medina, Damascus, Palestine, and Egypt. The numbers of the new mujahideen had far exceeded what Tariq needed. Therefore, the caliph selected 18,000 strong fighters and sent the rest back to their places. After supplying the new troops, the caliph sent a letter and demanded that Tariq ibn Ziyad should send to him 3,000 blonde virgins, white teenage young Christian girls. As soon as the letter reached Tariq ibn Ziyad, he fulfilled the demand of his caliph and sent the 3,000 captured Christian teenage girls. This established a direct relationship between Tariq and the Caliph of Damascus, which led him to ignore the orders of his master, Musa ibn Nasir, the Wali of North Africa. Musa understood that Tariq was pulling rank in him and ignoring his authority. Out of jealousy, he commanded Tariq to stop his rapid conquests and wait for him until he reached Andalusia, the ancient name of the Iberian Peninsula. Tariq ibn Ziyad refused to obey the order of his senior leader and continued to conquer city after city. I wonder, while Tariq and his satanic mujahideen were invading, killing, raping, pillaging, enslaving, burning, destroying, and converting the Christians of Spain and Portugal to Islam by the sword, why no Christians in Europe came for their rescue. Why the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church at Rome, the kings of Europe, and the Byzantine Emperor at Constantinople were silent and showed blind eye to the slaughter and suffering of their Christian brothers and sisters in the Iberian Peninsula. When Musa ibn Nasir reached the newly conquered lands with an army from Morocco under the leadership of his son, they also invaded many cities in the western region before they met with Tariq ibn Ziyad. When Musa reached Tariq, he humiliated him in front of his troops. He tied him with ropes and flogged him severely for daring to disobey his orders. Most probably, the news of this fight between those two big military commanders reached the ears of the Caliph at Damascus. Therefore, without giving any explanation, the Caliph ordered both commanders to halt their jihad invasions and return immediately to Damascus. When the two reached Damascus, Tariq ibn Ziyad mysteriously disappeared, and no Muslim historian knew anything about him until today. Musa ibn Nasir was sent to Mecca for pilgrimage and also died mysteriously in Medina. The disappearances of those two ruthless commanders diminished the military power of the Muslim armies in Andalusia and finally led to their crushing defeat by the Frankish king, Charles Martel, at the Battle of Tours in October 732. That battle took place after a century from the death of Muhammad, who died in 632. The Battle of Tours, also called the Battle of Poitiers because it happened near two cities, Tours and Poitiers. The Battle of Tours was fought between the huge Muslim army under the leadership of Abdulrahman Ghaffiji of 30,000 mujahideen and the Frankish army of 25,000 soldiers. Muslim historians exaggerated the number of Frankish soldiers and put it as big as 400,000 fighters. The Muslim army continued to advance in Europe and invaded South France. It kept on conquering, looting, raping, enslaving, forcibly converting, and advancing until it reached 30 miles away from the capital city, Paris. On their way to Paris, the Muslims invaded many Frankish villages, towns, and cities and collected a huge number of booties. Many of the Muslim mujahideen felt that they had gotten enough spoils and needed to go back to Andalusia and return another time to invade the capital of the infidels. Nevertheless, their commander, Abdulrahman Ghaffiji, insisted on continuing to Paris. He believed in the promise of his false prophet that great and blessed Muslim commanders were going to invade and capture Rome and Constantinople. At the time of the Battle of Tours, the Islamic military power reached its zenith. By then, it was the most powerful army in the entire world. At that time, Europe was not united under one military power. Therefore, the leader of the Moors was entirely full confident of victory. Arabs, Berbers, and Christians of Andalusia who were converted to Islam were known as Moors. The Franks were just wanted to defend their country from the invading army. When the two armies met and the battle began, the Moors were showing superiority and the battle was in their favor. Charles Martel, the commander of the Frankish army, understood the mentality of the Muslim Moors and knew exactly where their weak point lay. He understood that the Muslims were fighting for the booties, especially the women and wealth of the infidels. That interest did not surpass their interest in converting the infidels to Islam. They knew that if an infidel converted to Islam, then they could not take his women and wealth. But if he remained infidel, then they have the right to either kill him and get all his possession, women, wealth, cattle, and property, or force him to pay the jizya in gold. Modern historical research proved that the early Muslim mujahideen never carried copies of the Quran with them, but had only their swords, spears, and horses on them. Therefore, before the Battle of Tours, the Moorish mujahideen had already accumulated huge heaps of booties. The Moors were kept their booty at the rear, leaving a few Muslim guards. Charles Martel, with a small force, attacked the booty, killing the Muslim guards and set the huge heaps of the loots on fire. The Moors felt as if someone was setting their own families on fire. Accordingly, they broke their ranks and ran to save their booty. Such action led to confusion among the Moors. Their leaders lost control of the ranks. Immediately, the Franks ambushed the Moors and began to kill them. Some historians said that the Moors were so confused until they began to kill each other. Their main commander, Abdulrahman Ghaffiji, was also killed in the melee. When their commander was slain, the Muslims began to flee from the battleground, leaving their booty and dead mujahideen. It was a great victory for the Franks. Charles Martel emerged as a great hero and a savior of the West. He was nicknamed by the Pope of Rome, Charles Martel, which means Charles the Hammer. The Pope borrowed the name from the Jewish commander, Judas Maccabeus, in Hebrew Judas the Hammer, who defeated the Syrians under Antiochus IV in 165 BC and rededicated the temple in Jerusalem or Urshalem. Many historians believed that the Battle of Tours saved Christianity and Western civilization. Some historians also believed that had the Moors won the Battle of Tours, Europe would be today an Arabian continent, and the Europeans would be Muslims speaking Arabic. The casualties of the Frankish army were 1,100 dead Christian soldiers, while the Muslim army lost 12,000 mujahideen, including their main leader, Abdulrahman Ghaffiji. After the defeat of Poitiers or Tours, Muslim Moors never dared again invade France or try to advance in Western Europe. Therefore, they continued to attack Constantinople for 700 years until they captured and destroyed it in 1453. At the time of that invasion, millions of the citizens of the Byzantine Empire fled to Europe and Russia. Those who remained were forcibly converted into Islam. Today, the 99% of the Muslims of Turkey were once Orthodox Christians of Anatolia, which was part of the lost Byzantine Empire. Some historians said that the Second Rome, Constantinople, did not fall, but it moved to Russia and Moscow became the Third Rome. According to Dr. Bill Warner, Islam always inspires fear in the hearts of Westerners. How North Africa changed from being a Christian to a Muslim. How the Arab countries changed from Christian to Muslim countries. 25 years before the advent of Islam, the Persians and the Byzantines had massive wars in which 1/3 of the population died. 1/3 of the Byzantine Empire was destroyed by the plague which was called the Black Death. Dr. Bill Warner said, there are 548 battles waged against the infidels by the early Islamic mujahideen. According to Dr. Bill Warner, the classical Western civilization did not collapse because of the invasions of the Germanic tribes, but it had been destroyed by the Islamic invasions. Muhammad sent fighters to all Arab tribes to offer them Islam. If they refused to accept the offer of Islam, they were summarily annihilated. Muhammad sent his chief commander, Khalid ibn al-Walid, to the largest Arab tribe known as the Jazima tribe. Khalid destroyed the entire tribe because they rejected the offer of Islam and decided to fight. Their women and children were taken as captives, women got raped, and children sold in slave markets. At the Battle of Qadisiyah, in July 636, Khalid cut the head of the Persian commander and raped his wife on the ground. Her husband's blood was spilled. Khalid followed the example of his prophet Muhammad, who killed at the invasion of Khaybar city the Jewish leader, Kinana ibn Rabia, and took his wife, Safiya bint Huwaya, and raped her on the same day he murdered her husband. During the Wars of Apostasy, Khalid killed an Arab leader, known as Malik ibn Niyara, cooked and ate his head, and raped his wife Layla bint al-Minhal at the same time. At the Battle of Alais in May 633, in Iraq, Khalid and his troops continued to put the losers of the battle in bags and cut off their heads until the river ran red with their blood. The entire Persian troops of around 30,000 to 35,000 soldiers were slain by Muslims. Before the beginning of that bloody battle, Khalid had prayed to his Lucifer Allah, "O Lord, if you give us victory, I shall see that no enemy warrior is left alive until their river runs with their blood." Therefore, the Battle of Alais is also known as the Battle of Blood River because the water of the river Euphrates became red of the blood of the many slain Persians. 35,000 Persian were slaughtered by Muslim mujahideen in that battle. There's a story narrated by Muslim historians which shows how cruel and evil Khalid was towards the infidels. In one battle against the pagan Arabs, Khalid with his sword dripping blood chased an Arab leader and tried to kill him. When the leader found himself being cornered and has no way of escape, he threw his sword and shouted loudly, "I bear witness there is no God but Allah and Muhammad his messenger." It means he pronounced the Shahada, Islamic creed, and declared himself Muslim, even though Khalid reached him and struck off his neck. When the news reached the ears of the Prophet Muhammad, he rebuked Khalid for killing a person who pronounced the Shahada. Khalid said to Muhammad that the slain leader pronounced the Shahada because he's scared of death. The Prophet said to him, "Had you opened his heart and seen that he said it out of fear for his life?" In his book, Al-Riyad al-Nadira, Al-Tabari mentioned that the Arab tribe of Banu Salim had reneged, apostatized from Islam. Whereupon the Caliph Abu Bakr al-Siddiq sent them Khalid ibn al-Walid, who gathered their men inside animal sheds, then set them to fire. Dr. Bill Warner continued to say that the second Caliph Omar's troops invaded the Levant and also Jerusalem, and those Jews and Christians who refused the compulsory offer of Islam were turned into dhimmis, third-class citizens and semi-slaves. The dhimmis were the Jews or Christians who agreed to pay annually the jizya in pure gold to Muslim leaders. The majority of the Arab Christians could not afford to pay the heavy jizya and hence forcibly converted to Islam. During the so-called Golden Age of Islam, during the reign of the Abbasid dynasty, Muslims attacked the Sindh region in India and killed 26,000 Hindus in one single battle. Armenian nobles fled and took refuge in a church. The building was destroyed and all were burned inside. At Ephesus city, 7,000 Greek Christians were enslaved. All new churches were destroyed. In Egypt and Syria, 30,000 churches were burned down and completely destroyed. In Thessalonica, 22,000 Greek Christians were enslaved. In Seville, thousands of Christians massacred. 6,000 Jews of Morocco killed. Hundreds of Jews in Cordoba killed. 4,000 Christians of Granada killed. Georgia and Armenia invaded. In another battle in Hindustan, India, 15,000 were killed and 5,000,000, 500,000 Hindus, were enslaved, the majority of them young girls and children. In Yemen, the Jews were given two choices: convert to Islam or die. Christians of Granada were deported to Morocco. In India, many cities destroyed, Hindus were told to convert or die. Muslim commanders boasted among themselves about who would make the biggest and tallest hills of Hindu skulls. Some of them gained the titles of idol smashers. Thousands of Hindu girls were raped, and untold numbers of children enslaved. In one town, 20,000 enslaved. Buddhist monks butchered, and Buddhist nuns raped by Muslim mujahideen. Damascus and Safed were invaded and mass murdered Christians. In Marrakesh, Jews were massacred, and in Tabriz, Jews were forcibly converted. The Cairo riots led to churches being burned. The Mongol Muslim commander, Tamerlane, Timur the Lame, killed as many as 90,000 Hindus in one single day. No one in the entire human history was able to kill 90,000 people in one day except that ruthless Muslim commander, and perhaps second to him comes the atrocity of the nuclear weapon, known as the Little Boy, that was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, and killed in one single day 70,000 people. Tamerlane gained the title, the evilest man ever lived. In another battle, Tamerlane massacred 30,000 surrendered Hindus in cold blood. He devastated 700 Hindu villages. Tamerlane also invaded Iraq and completely annihilated Nestorian and Jacobite Christians. Half of the population of Afghanistan were Christians, but Tamerlane made it completely Muslim. Another Muslim leader, called Tughlaq, took 180,000 Hindus as slaves. After 700 years of continuous attacks, Islam captured and destroyed Constantinople in 1453. The son of Tamerlane, Babur, invaded India and destroyed thousands of Hindu temples and forced conversions. Muslim generals built 2 tall towers of human heads slain in battles after their victories. Noble Hindu women committed mass suicides to avoid sexual slavery and rape. According to Dr. Bill Warner, the Jews of Persia, modern-day Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and Yemen were forced to convert and followed by forced conversions of Greek Christians to Islam. In Persia, also persecutions of Zoroastrians increased, and those who survived the massacres fled to India. In India, 600,000 Hindus killed by Akbar, the greatest Muslim Mughal emperor. Jews of Jeddah expelled, and Jews of Morocco massacred. Forced conversions of Jews in Iran. Zoroastrians were annihilated in Persia. Jews of Baghdad massacred. About 250,000 Armenian Christians were slaughtered in Turkey. In the 20th century, over 1,500,000 Armenian Christians were killed in jihad, the Armenian Genocide of 1915, also known as the first Holocaust in the world. In 15 years, the entire Persian Empire was defeated and converted to Islam. In 25 years, Islam spread from China in the east to Tunisia in North Africa. Nevertheless, Islam could not destroy the entire Byzantine Empire. In a short period, Islam took 2/3 of its lands, Levant, Egypt, North Africa, and Spain. No empire in human history lasted as long as the Byzantine Empire. It lasted for 1,123 years. The Roman Empire lasted for 800 years, Ottoman Empire for 500 years, and the Chinese Manchu Empire for 300 years. Emperor Justinian built the Dome of Hagia Sophia, which was the main church of the emperor and his royal family. Since 1453, Muslims converted it into a mosque. The Byzantine Empire stretched from Serbia, Bulgaria, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Israel, Palestine, Syria, and part of Italy, and had 1,000 cities. Unfortunately, the demise of this great empire was caused by the Fourth Crusade. In 1204, the Republic of Venice hired the Fourth Crusaders from French, German, and Italian contingents. Instead of liberating the Holy Land of Christ from the Muslim invaders, those crusaders invaded and sacked Constantinople. The Byzantines considered them to be brothers in the Christian faith, and hence they were not prepared for the attack. After invading and controlling Constantinople, the Crusaders continued to steal the wealth of the Byzantine Empire. For 50 uninterrupted years, all the treasures and gold of the empire were carried away. Besides that, earthquakes and plagues weakened the empire. The city, Constantinople, recovered after 50 years, but the Byzantine Empire could never recover from the barbaric assault of the Fourth Crusade. In the year 1453, Sultan Muhammad II of the Ottoman Empire used cannons and destroyed the 3 walls of Constantinople. Those deadly weapons were made by a Christian Westerner who sold himself to the Muslim Sultan Muhammad II. That traitor first approached the Byzantine Emperor and offered his new weapons. When the Byzantine Emperor could not afford to give him what he wanted, he turned to the enemy and sold his deadly merchandise to them. The cannons allowed the Ottomans to finally destroy the 3 walls of the strongly fortified city. When Sultan Muhammad II took the city, he gathered all the rich citizens and chopped off their heads, and had their dead bodies thrown to the hungry dogs. It is said that the Sultan killed the rich citizens of Constantinople because they refused to lend money to their emperor to purchase the cannons. The Muslim Ottomans laid siege to the city with an army of 200,000 men. At that time, Constantinople was defended by 7,000 men, of whom 2,000 were foreigners. The Sultan's troops were consisting of Janissaries, Turks, and Anatolians. Janissaries were Christian children who were kidnapped by Muslims from Christian villages, towns, and cities. Then, those kidnapped children were brainwashed and converted to Islam. After that, they were trained in military warfare. Those children would grow up without family attachments, and they were loyal only to the Ottoman Sultan. They were neither allowed to marry nor to have their own families and children. The only relative they had was the Sultan. Then, they would send them to invade Christian lands. They were known as the killing machine. The Muslim sultans used them to destroy half of Europe and Asia. Through them, the Ottoman Empire captured all of Arabia and North Africa. Also, they were the main cause behind the defeat and capture of Constantinople, which marked the demise of the greatest Western empire, the Byzantine Empire. The battle and control of Constantinople marked the end of the greatest empire in human history, an empire that lasted for 1,123 years. The city's fall was a massive blow on Western Christendom. Pope Nicholas V immediately ordered a counterattack, but his sudden death put an end to that plan. Many Greeks fled the city and migrated to other parts of Europe, in particular Italy. Their arrival in Western Europe ignited the Renaissance and eventually led to the Reformation. Therefore, many scholars believe that the fall of Constantinople marked the end of the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages. Many Greek Orthodox Christians fled to Russia. Russia became the spiritual successor of the Byzantine Empire. Some historians said that the Great Byzantine Empire did not fall, but it moved to the east and Moscow became the Third Rome. The year 410 was considered the time Rome first fell when the barbarians invaded it. Historians believed that the Western Empire, the Roman Empire, did not fall until 476 after the barbarian leader, Odoacer, deposed the last Roman emperor Romulus, and that marked the final fall of Rome. Odoacer established himself as leader over Italy. The glory of the Roman Empire was ended when a pagan leader made himself a king in Rome. In fact, at that time, only the western half of the Roman Empire fell. The Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, continued to exist in the area called Byzantium, today in Turkey. By the year 1000 AD, 2/3 of the Christian world was possessed by the Muslim invaders. Out of the important 5 ancient Christian cities, 3 were taken by Muslims, namely Jerusalem or Urshalim, Antioch, and Alexandria. Only Constantinople and Rome still remained in the hands of Christians. Muslims believed these cities too were destined for them. They claimed that their prophet Muhammad told them that they were going to invade and possess Constantinople and Rome. Islam became the superpower of the medieval world. Each year brought forth new invasions and new possessions to Islam from the Christian lands. In 1071, the Muslim Turks invaded Asia Minor and possessed the region of Anatolia, today Turkey. The inhabitants of this large region were new converts to Islam. They were Christians before they were invaded and forcibly converted to Islam by the force of the sword of jihad. They were like the Berber tribes of North Africa. They were not Arabs, but had migrated from Asia to the region of Asia Minor. They became more zealous for the cause of Islam than those who had converted them to the religion of Muhammad. They behaved like the Muslim Mongol Great Ghazi, great invader, Tamerlane, who turned against other Muslims and invaded and captured their countries. After their forcible conversion to Islam, the Muslim Turks turned against their Arab masters and attacked them. They took Syria and Palestine from the Arab Muslims and began their own Muslim caliphate, the Ottoman Sultanate or the Muslim Empire. However, since the Prophet Muhammad said in one of his authentic hadiths, only an Arab Muslim from the Quraysh tribe can be appointed caliph, therefore the Turks called their caliphs, sultans, and their caliphate sultanate. The last Arab caliphate was destroyed by the Mongols under Genghis Khan in 1258. On February 13, 1258, Hulagu Khan, the main general commander of Genghis Khan's troops, invaded Baghdad and assassinated the last Abbasid caliph, Al-Mu'tasim Bilha, and ended that 500-years-old caliphate. Nevertheless, the Mongols picked up the virus, and soon they too would be converted to Islam and would wreak havoc of unceasing Islamic invasions and convert millions to Islam in Asia and Eastern Europe and Russia. Those invasions were done by Tamerlane or Timur the Lame, the evilest man ever lived. We see the same pattern with the Berbers, Turks, and Mongols, all forcibly converted to Islam, contaminated to a greater degree, spreading their increasingly virulent contagion. Tamerlane was a Mongol warrior who became a Turk and a convert to Islam. He claimed to be a direct descendant from Genghis Khan. The name Tamerlane is an English corruption to his real name Timur the Lame. He was known as Timur the Lame because when he was a young boy, he stole a sheep and got shot in his leg with a long-range bow by a shepherd, and that rendered him lame for the rest of his life. Tamerlane means Timur the Lame. At first, Tamerlane called himself the Sword of Islam. According to Islamic tradition, the honorable title of the Sword of Islam was bestowed by the Prophet Muhammad on his military genius, Khalid ibn al-Walid. As we mentioned, Tariq ibn Ziyad was nicknamed Khalid ibn al-Walid of the Berber tribes. After conquering many lands in Asia and Europe, Tamerlane, Timur the Lame, decided to declare himself the new Muslim caliph, but was told by Muslim scholars that he could not be a caliph because he was not an Arab. In fact, not every Muslim Arab can be a caliph unless he is from the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad. According to Muhammad, his caliph, or successor in the leadership of the Muslims, must be a Muslim man, an Arab man, and a direct descendant of the Prophet's tribe of the Quraysh. Since the last Abbasid caliph was captured and put in a sack and trodden underfoot and brutally killed by Hulagu, Genghis Khan's chief commander, no Muslim man has ever claimed to be a caliph except the contemporary Muslim terrorist leader, Abu Bakr Hussein al-Qurashi al-Hashimi al-Baghdadi, the leader of today's ISIS, the new resurrection of the Islamic State, or Caliphate. For 756 years, no one had ever claimed that honorific title except this terrible leader of the evilest terrorist group ever produced by the religion of peace. Accordingly, young Muslim men and women migrate from all over the world to Turkey, Syria, and Iraq to join the army of the newly resurrected Islamic Caliphate. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi claimed to be legally the Muslim caliph, 100% the divinely anointed Qurashi caliph. September 11, 1683, was the day when an alliance of Christian armies led by Jan Sobieski III, the King of Poland arrived at the gates of Vienna and changed the victory of Muslim Mujahideen into crushing defeat. For that reason, Osama bin Laden chose September 11th to carry out his cowardly attacks on the Twin Towers in New York. He wanted to tell the Christian world that Islam still determined in conquering the Western world and changing it into a Muslim world. Many Westerners are ignorant of their past history and hence believe that Islam is a peaceful religion that spread through mere preaching. George Santayana said those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Today, in Western schools and universities, Christianity is presented to the students as a bloody religion that caused the death of millions and for a long time blocked scientific discoveries and progress. On the contrary, the Muslim Moors of Spain is taught to Western students as more knowledgeable and advanced in science, art, medicine, and philosophy than medieval Christianity, which behind the Dark Ages in Europe. The religion of the devil has become the source of light and knowledge, and the religion of God has been turned into darkness and ignorance. Worse than that all, there are some Westerners who believe Islam is the religion of peace and some convert to it. No wonder Satan can masquerade himself into an angel of light. Before the Battle of Vienna, the Muslim Mujahideen, the Ottoman Turks, overrun Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, and Serbia. They turned Protestant Hungary into a compliant vassal and made war repeatedly on Austria and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Ottomans set their eyes on Vienna since they knew the fall of the city would open the way into the heart of Austria and southern Germany. Their final target was Rome, the capital of Christendom. They knew if they capture Rome, the second capital of the Western world, then Christianity is doomed. They had failed to take the city, Vienna, in the siege of 1529. Under the leadership of the Grand Vizier, Pasha Kara Mustafa, and with their Tatar and Malaysian allies, they made their preparations and fought their way towards the capital, overrunning Austrian towns and villages. Wherever the Muslim Mujahideen went, they plundered cities, raped women, took slaves, turned churches into mosques, and converted many thousands of Christian captives to Islam at the point of a sword. In 1683, the combined armies of the Ottoman Empire, large and well-equipped forces, laid siege in Vienna. The city was nearing the end of its ability to resist, but just as the capture of Vienna was becoming a matter of time, an army came to its rescue. On September 12th, in an open battle before Vienna, the Muslim Mujahideen received a crushing defeat, and the city escaped pillage and destruction. The chief commander of the army that rescued Vienna was the Polish king, Jan Sobieski III. His decisive victory is like that of Charles Martel's victory at the Battle of Tours, or Poitiers, in 732, which stopped the advance of Muslim Mujahideen in Western Europe. Likewise, the Polish king, Jan Sobieski, saved Christianity and Western civilization. But Muslims never give up until today. In the past, they failed to militarily defeat Christendom, but today they are invading the Western world through mass immigration, the influx of illegal immigrants, and multiplying from within through polygamies and lack of birth controls. The apostate girl Anaz also spoke briefly about the brutal invasions of Muslim Mujahideen to India. From the time Muslims started arriving, around 632 AD, the history of India becomes a long, monotonous series of murders, massacres, spoliations, and destructions. It is, as usual, in the name of a holy war of their faith, of their sole God, that the Muslim barbarians have destroyed civilizations, wiped out entire races. Mahmud Ghazni was an early example of Muslim ruthlessness, burning in the year 1018 all temples of Mathura, razing Kanauj to the ground, and destroying the famous temple of Somnath, sacred to all Hindus. His successors were as ruthless as Ghazni. 103 temples in the holy city of Benares were razed to the ground, its marvelous temples destroyed, its magnificent palaces wrecked. The Hindu sage Padmanabha described in his book, Kanhadade Prabandha in 1456, the story of the Muslim invasion of the Gujarat state of 1298. The conquering Muslim army burned villages, devastated the land, plundered people's wealth, took Brahmins and children and women of all classes as slave captives, flogged with thongs of rawhide, carried a moving prison with it, and converted the prisoners into obsequious slaves. The blood of the infidels flowed so copiously at Thanesar that the river was discolored, notwithstanding its purity, and people were unable to drink it. The Sultan returned with plunder which is impossible to count. Quoting the Tariq Yamani of Atbai, the Sultan's secretary written in the 11th century, that the magnitude of crimes credited to Muslim monarchs by medieval Muslim historians was beyond measure. With a few exceptions, Muslim kings and commanders were monsters who stopped at no crime when it came to their Hindu subjects. But what strikes me as more significant is the broad pattern of those crimes. The pattern is that of a jihad in which the Ghazis, invaders, of Islam, 1. Invade infidel lands. 2. Massacre as many infidel men, women, and children, particularly Brahmins, as they like after winning a victory. 3. Capture the survivors to be sold as slaves. 4. Plunder every place and person. 5. Demolish idolatrous places of worship and build mosques in their places. 6. Defile idols that are flung into public squares or made into steps leading to mosques. Still more significant is the fact that this is exactly the pattern. 1. Revealed by Allah in the Quran. 2. Practiced, perfected, and prescribed by the Prophet in his own lifetime. 3. Followed by the pious caliphs of Islam in the first 35 years of Islamic imperialism. 4. Elaborated in the hadiths and hundreds of commentaries with meticulous attention to detail. 5. Certified by the ulama and the Sufis of Islam in all ages, including our own. And 6. Followed by all Muslim monarchs and chieftains who aspired for name and fame in this life, and houris and beardless boys in paradise. Citing S.R. Goel. 2001. The Story of Islamic Imperialism in India. New Delhi. In the year 997, a Turkish chieftain by the name of Mahmud became sultan of the little state of Ghazni in eastern Afghanistan. Pretending a holy zeal for destroying Hindu idolatry, Sultan Mahmud swept across the frontier with a force inspired by a pious aspiration for booty. He met the unprepared Hindus at Bhimnagar, slaughtered them, pillaged their cities, destroyed their temples, and carried away the accumulated treasures of centuries. Returning to Ghazni, he astonished the ambassadors of foreign powers by displaying jewels and unbearded pearls and rubies shining like sparks, or like wine congealed with ice, and emeralds like fresh sprigs of myrtle, and diamonds in size and weight like pomegranates. Each winter Mahmud descended into India, filled his treasure chest with spoils, and amused his men with full freedom to pillage and kill. Each spring he returned to his capital richer than before. At Mathura, on the Jumna, he took from the temple its statues of gold encrusted with precious stones and emptied its coffers of a vast quantity of gold, silver, and jewelry. He expressed his admiration for the architecture of the great shrine, judged that its duplication would cost 100 million dinars and the labor of 200 years, and then ordered it to be soaked with naphtha and burnt to the ground. 6 years later, he sacked another opulent city of northern India, Somnath, killed all its 50,000 inhabitants, and dragged its wealth to Ghazni. In the end, he became, perhaps, the richest king that history has ever known. Sometimes he spared the population of the ravaged cities and took them to his kingdom to be sold as slaves, but so great was the number of such captives that after some years no one could be found to offer more than a few shillings for a slave. Before every military engagement, Mahmud knelt in prayer and asked the blessing of God upon his army. He reigned for a third of a century, and when he died, full of years and honors, Muslim historians ranked him as the greatest Muslim monarch of his time, and one of the greatest sovereigns of any age. In 1186 the Ghuri, a Muslim Turkish tribe of Afghanistan, invaded India, captured the city of Delhi, destroyed its temples, confiscated its wealth, and settled down in its palaces to establish the Islamic Sultanate of Delhi. An alien despotism fastened on northern India for over 3 centuries and plagued by internal assassinations of royal Muslims and Hindu revolts. The first of these bloody sultans, Qutb Aibak, was a normal specimen of his kind, fanatical, ferocious, and merciless. His gifts, as the Mohammedan historian tells us, were bestowed by hundreds of thousands, and his slaughters likewise were by hundreds of thousands. In one victory of this warrior, 50,000 men came under the collar of slavery, and the plain became black as pitch with the blood of the slain Hindus. Another sultan, Balban, punished Hindu rebels and brigands by casting them under the feet of elephants or removing their skins, stuffing these with straw, and hanging them from the gates of Delhi. When some Mongol inhabitants who had settled in Delhi attempted a rising, Sultan Aladdin, the conqueror of Chittor, had all the males, from 15 to 30,000 of them, slaughtered in one day. Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq surpassed his predecessors in bloodshed and brutality and murders till the Hindu inhabitants fled to the jungle. He killed so many Hindus that, in the words of a Muslim historian, there was constantly in front of his royal pavilion and his civil court a mound of dead bodies and a huge heap of decomposed corpses, while the sweepers and executioners were wearied out by their work of dragging the victims and putting them to death in crowds. A clear example of the destructions of the Hindu and Buddhist cultures and their temples can be seen in the siege of Dibal by Muhammad bin Qasim. He marched into India with a large military expedition. In the latter part of the siege of Dibal, defectors informed Muhammad about how the temple could be captured. Following their information, the Arabs planted their ladders on the walls of the citadel and stormed over them. Once they took Dibal, the citizens were given the invitation to accept Islam, and upon refusal, the males were slaughtered, and the women and children were taken into slavery. The carnage lasted for 3 days, killing, plundering, and gang-raping of Hindu women, young and underage girls. Many Brahmin royal women committed mass suicides to avoid sex slavery. Then, their temple was razed and was replaced by a mosque. After that, Muhammad bin Qasim went and left behind him a garrison of 4,000 Muslim soldiers in the town. The spoils of conquest were divided first among the leadership and then the common soldiers, and this would be repeated again and again with continued Islamic conquests. As this was the pattern of all future sieges of Muhammad bin Qasim, as indeed of all future Muslim invaders of Hindustan, it may be repeated. Inhabitants of a captured fort or town were invited to accept Islam or face death. India would face 3 major invasions over the centuries, beginning with the Arabs and continuing with the Mughals and the Seljuk Turks in the 11th century AD. Over and over again the same scenario repeated itself, with those who converted being spared and those who did not accept the religion of peace being massacred or enslaved. In every case, their temples were destroyed, along with all the idols within them, and the remains of the temple were used to build a mosque on the former temple site. Later Turkish invasions would even be more brutal. The Turkic Seljuk tribes who had converted to Islam were no less destructive to India's largely Hindu and Buddhist population. Like the Arabs, the Turks gave the same invitation to convert or die. In conclusion, in all 548 jihadi battles of invasions that waged by Muslim mujahideen during the 500 years of spreading Islam around the world, historians estimated that 272 million people were killed, of whom 80 million Hindus, 60 million Christians, 10 million Buddhists, and an uncountable number of Jews. It is the bloodiest religion in human history. No other religion in the entire history of mankind on the planet Earth had come even remotely close to the mass murders, massacres, rapes, enslavement, genocides, destruction, and debris that this so-called religion of peace has done. The Bible said about them, "Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their paths, and the path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes." Read Romans 3. Verses 15 to 17. Note that Islam is the youngest religion among the major religions of the world. Judaism came 2,200 years before Islam, Hinduism 1,700 years, Buddhism 1,200 years, and Christianity 700 years. And none of them had caused such destruction and misery in our world as Islam did and continues to do every day and every minute through the widely spread terrorist attacks and religious and civil wars in Syria, Iraq, Libya, Tunisia, Yemen, Egypt, Lebanon, Israel, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nigeria, Somalia, and Sudan. Muslim terrorists are killing and terrorizing innocent people all over Europe and America. It all had started by a single tyrant, a false prophet, and a demon-possessed man called Muhammad. Muslim historians do not hide the fact that Islam spread by the sword. Muslim mujahideen have killed millions of infidels, looted their treasures, occupied their lands, enslaved their children, and raped their women. To Muslims, those bloody Islamic invasions are seen as acts of altruism. They are referred to as futuhat, which literally means openings, that is, the countries conquered were opened for the light of Islam to enter and guide its infidel inhabitants to the truth of Islam. Thus, to Muslims, there is nothing to regret or apologize for concerning the invasions of other countries and rape the women of the defeated infidel men and slave of their citizens. They are seen as for the good of those who were conquered and made Muslims by the edge of the sword.